Thanks very much, guys. Look, at risk of burning some of my own time, James, that was fabulous. Quite frankly, as you'll quickly work out, and the graphic pretty much shows it, we're a steel business. We work with construction companies quite often. We go through the tender rigmarole all of the time, and it presents its own fair share of challenges, which is a completely separate conversation, but I will sort of endeavour to give you some context around some of the challenges that we find, and hopefully that will deliver some value for you guys as well. So look, my name's Aaron Hunt. I work for a company called InfraBuild, and I'll talk a little bit today about that company. Going to give you a little bit of context around some of the previous sales capability work that we've done and sales enablement, some of the challenges that we've gone through over the course of the last number of years, as well as also the more recent work that we're doing, and from there, hopefully give you a little bit of a sort of snapshot as to some of the things we're seeing out of that as compared to the work we did previously, and give you some things to think about in terms of the work that you guys may be doing yourselves in your own organisations, or you may confront at some other point in the future, and hopefully some key learnings that we take away from that. So look, as I mentioned, we're a steel manufacturer and distributor, and we are formerly the One Steel business. So anybody heard of One Steel? Mm-hmm. Excellent. There's a name that we used to go by that people actually recognise. That's right. A good start. Anybody heard of InfraBuild at all? No. Sort of, maybe.
No.
We were Arium before that. When we got bought out, we were Liberty for a little while, then we became GFG, now we've become InfraBuild. So as you can well imagine, this is a pretty volatile or uncertain environment for everybody concerned in the organisation. So it's kind of interesting. So we're a big business. Most people don't realise it, but we're actually a big business. We do $3 billion plus a year in revenue, and we manufacture and sell about 2.5 million tonnes of steel. So it's quite a bit of product. If you imagine that, obviously we've got to move all of that. We move sort of 600,000 tonnes a year, goes via rail sort of from South Australia through Victoria and up to Newcastle, as an example. And so our products are big, they're bulky, they're heavy. Our business is old, it's dirty. It's a really fascinating business. So it's going to be very, very different to some of the things perhaps that you'll see in terms of the conversations around technology focused businesses. So I'm hoping there's something in that for you as well. We've got a myriad of old world ERP systems. This is another one of the really fascinating things about our business. If you look across all the different divisions, they were all at some point in time parts of the BHP business, as was BlueScope. We were floated in 2000, they were floated in 2001. Had very different fortunes since. Both businesses just about went broke at different points in time. Unfortunately, we managed to actually do that. So it's not exactly a goal that we want to be, we wanted to target. Nothing that we're particularly proud about, but a consequence of obviously some strategic decisions at board level and investment in iron ore mining as an example, as opposed to investing in your core business. And so as a result, strategic underinvestment meant that was kind of an inevitability. So ERPs and MRPs, we've got 30-year-old systems that don't talk to anything else. Or at least if they do, they're speaking a different language and they don't really like to communicate. So it actually makes this whole notion of sales enablement and integration and actually your record of notes, so single source of truth and so on, that actually becomes really difficult, extremely problematic in our business. We've got horrendously long tenure in our business. And I'll talk about an example a little bit later on in one particular team, and in fact the team that I use to provide you with a little bit of a snapshot of some of the results we've had of recent times. But we had the longest serving salesperson in that particular business was 43 years. He still has laminated a copy of his first ever payslip. He's really proud of it. I reckon that's fantastic. But at the same time, obviously we know the world has changed, so you would expect that your salespeople would change along with it as well. Otherwise, you're in a bit of trouble. But look, we're part of the GFG Alliance. It's about $14 billion US in revenue these days, somewhere around 11,000 employees across over 15 countries. So it is a big organisation. And I guess the challenge, of course, is that we don't really know yet where we fit. What we know is that they bought the business to get their hands on the Whyalla steel manufacturing facility. So they've got that. What they do with the rest of the business, God only knows at this point in time. So somewhere along the line, we've got to sing for our supper. If we want to attract investment, we want to attract working capital, we're going to have to put up some results that actually justify why it is they should continue to invest in us. Otherwise, obviously, nothing's going to change. So, sum it up, we're a very old and complex business. We change very slowly. We have a lot of people that were brought up and raised in the BHP business. And so, as harsh as it sounds, even through to senior managers who have never worked anywhere else other than the BHP and then One Steel years of the organisation. They don't necessarily know what it is that they need to bring to bear to actually achieve the results that we need within the market as it changes right now. It is changing rapidly. We deal with construction companies. We might deal with a concreter who's doing a driveway through to someone like a Lend-Lease. And in fact, one of the photos that you'll see shortly, you can walk out this door and actually look across to Barangaroo and see the buildings that we actually supplied the steel for. So I don't really need that photo. But we are still under pressure within a market that, so if you know anything about construction, the margins are razor thin. We're dealing with one customer at the moment, or we had a conversation with a customer recently. They do $1 billion in turnover a month and are struggling to return a black number. And you look at, how would you feel if that was the case? $1 billion a month, and you don't know whether you're going to make profit next month or not. And in fact, all it is one little thing going wrong, and you're in the red. Not just for the month, but for the year.
Wow.
Horrendous. So nobody really likes to talk about that. That's the elephant in the room that nobody wants to confront. But the challenge is, of course, is that we've got to try and make some money within that environment as a supplier to those sorts of businesses. And yet we don't exactly have all the tools in place to be able to do that efficiently, effectively, profitably, and manage our risk as well. And so when James starts talking about managing your risk, your delivery risk in particular, it's a very timely warning. I think you should come and talk to our business at some point in time. So we've supplied some of the most iconic buildings in Australia. This is just a snapshot of some of them from one of our businesses, but pretty much anything that is worth anything in Australia in terms of infrastructure or building structure, we have supplied steel to. So it's a fantastic business. Some parts of our business, in fact, our Australian Reinforcing Company business turns 100 in October. So you've got a lot of inertia there for the status quo. Even the Sydney Metro project, so again, going on underneath, well, not quite underneath us here at the moment, but all of this reinforcing that you see in there has all come from us, all Australian made, all supplied by ourselves. We have probably the worst case scenario. We have mass customisation. Every single bar that comes out of our production facilities has to be cut and bent in a particular shape to suit an engineer's drawings. And so as a result, the likelihood of getting that right all the time is pretty much negligible. So it's a really complex business, has a lot of downside risk. Can't understate that enough. Or overstate it enough. It's really important for us to understand that in the way that we go about our selling, and obviously in terms of our delivery and our risk management around that as well. So we've done some sales enablement work for a period of time. I've been at this for a little while in this company, and I've got to say we did some interesting work in the first number of years. So if you go 2011 through to 2016, we built a whole bunch of stuff that we thought was actually quite appropriate for where the business is at and where we need to go with it. One of the challenges really that we found, certainly when I stepped into this role in 2011, it was with one division of the business that we've subsequently sold or closed those businesses, 8 different businesses. So a lot has changed in that time. What we really needed to understand at that point in time, though, was what is it that we could draw from in terms of the resources out there, and who are the influential thinkers that we could actually draw upon to say this is where we really want to go or should go. Interestingly, 2011, there wasn't an awful lot around sales enablement out there. Now, 2011 was also when Challenger Sale was released. I remember buying the book in the October of 2011, the moment it had come out, because I was scraping for things at that point in time to say what new thinking is there out there that would actually support the transformation of this organisation as a selling business, as a customer-centric selling organisation. So we looked at it and said, what sort of evidence-backed capability frameworks can we use to actually guide us in terms of the things that we need to do within the organisation that need fixing? We looked at it in terms of, have we got a sales methodology? So when we talk about sales methodology, we're talking about crafting that from a range of the different views in terms of how we might go about selling. So is it going to be a challenger selling? Is it going to be consultative selling? Is it going to be what we settled on in the end was a value-based selling approach? So it's all about value, essentially, explicit value. Agreed on clear and concise sales processes for different parts of the organisation. So realistically, we've got some exceptionally complex sales cycles that might be 2 to 3 years in the making. We're talking at the moment around Snowy Hydro 2. We're talking around Cross River Rail in Brisbane. That's going to be 100,000 tonnes of steel. And as you can well imagine, if we put 20 to 24 tonne of steel on each truck, that's a whole lot of trucks worth of steel. So it's a massive undertaking. We developed a capability framework for all sales roles, so all customer-facing sales roles. We looked at it and said, what are the skills and characteristics that we should see within those people? And we used that, or we supplemented what was already a leadership capability framework with what we thought our customer competencies should be. We looked at how we would then use that to actually drive individual developmental plans. We looked at a range of programs, or we developed and deployed a range of programs, all in-house. The remit from the company was, don't have any money to spend. Build it, deploy it, manage it, run it, fix it, whatever it might happen to be. And originally when I first started in 3 different divisions of the business, we had 3 sales enablement managers. And then over a period of probably 6 months, it then became, I was the sales enablement department. So it hasn't changed since, funny enough. Now, this is probably the interesting one. We partially deployed a web-based CRM system. When I say partially deployed, this comes back to the same point around legacy ERPs. It's really hard to plug things in that don't want to be talked to. And so as a consequence, what we ended up with was a system that was functional, but at the same time, it really had that burden around it's more effort to put data in than the value I get out of it. Massive challenge for us. And then agreed on minimum standards principles, and then completely ignored those, by the way, as you usually do. Like all things, when you go and put documents together, the challenge is they go and sit on a shelf and they get forgotten about. People don't come back to them unless you've got some really passionate managers that just continue to drive it. The challenge for us, of course, was that in that period before voluntary administration, it got to a point at one stage where it was really about cash generation. The business needed to keep the lights on, so therefore we sell anything that's not nailed down to actually just keep the lights on.
Keep going.
So around capability frameworks, so just really touch on a couple of these very quickly. So Corporate Executive Board obviously did some work around Anatomy of World-Class Selling Organisation, which I thought at the time, and to be honest, to this day, I think is actually a really, really good holistic framework for looking at some of the things that need to be considered within your organisation. We did a very large research project, was probably 200 interviews that we conducted around the organisation in every part of it in terms of managers and salespeople to try and understand where we're at in terms of our ability to sell. One of the things that we very quickly realised was that not everything can be dealt with using a sales enablement function that is only worried about those 8 things that I talked to you about before. The challenge we've got is that some of them come down to rem and ben issues, incentives, how we hire and recruit people, how we onboard people. There's a bunch of stuff in there that, quite frankly, at that point in time was probably a little bit of a bridge too far for the organisation to actually deal with everything at the same time. We were quite frankly confronting this scenario where everything you looked at needed to be fixed. And you've got limited time, and you've got limited money, and you've got limited attention from particularly the most important line managers that you needed. So it was a challenge. We had to go through and actually make sure that, and this is one of the interesting things about an organisation like ours, is that because we've got such inertia, we've got such a history, is that everybody thought that the way that we were doing it or that our business is different. Everybody will argue their business is different. I'm sure there are some subtleties, but for the most part, one of the bigger challenges is to then craft a sales methodology using components that are palatable to the people within the business that actually allow you to get that change, as opposed to people saying, quite frankly, I'm not really that interested. One of the key things for us was, how do we actually change people's focus away from purely looking at it from the point of view of, we've done some sales training before and we have a sales process. That's great. Does it take any consideration or take into account any sort of thinking around where the customer is at in their buying journey? Not really, no. That's not important to us. We, at one point in time, were a market leader with very few competitors. We had tariff protections. We had all sorts of things going in our favour. People would come begging to us when they wanted steel. Unfortunately, in the days when people weren't coming begging to us, we still kept that same sort of culture. And so we had to go and understand this, had to go and talk to a whole bunch of people about it and actually build things that they were then prepared to take on board. We looked at the competencies, as I mentioned before. We looked through each part of the organisation and said, well, in regards to value propositions, what would that look like for different levels of the organisation, and how do we actually talk about or pull that apart into some very clear and explicit language to say this is what you should be able to be capable or should be capable of doing, or your salespeople should be capable of doing. Did that for research and insights around, as I said, value propositions and negotiation, you name it. We built it. Went through the process of creating ways to assess and develop developmental plans so that we could come up with the 2 to 3 key things that were really important for a salesperson to work on with an individual salesperson. And it was a 180 process. So it was the sales manager and the individual, and they both had a view on that. And really the value was in the collaboration around coming to an agreement around where they thought they needed to focus. So that's all great. We did all of that. And the challenge, of course, is that with the circumstances facing the organisation, we had some challenges. So, a couple of the things. Limited executive sponsorship. When all the GMs and the chief executives are concerned about is paying bills, they don't tend to talk about this stuff very much. And so it doesn't become particularly important to them. And so the limited time they do spend with their line leaders and their teams is focused purely around, obviously, the hot topic at that point in time, which is sell more, spend less. Pretty simple message. Don't get me wrong, they wanted it. It wasn't that they didn't want it, it was just that their focus was elsewhere. And so, of course, what that really does is it gets to the point where you have a lot of managers that then say, well, look, we don't want to give the guys too much to think about. So it's not that and that message, we'll just go with that message right now. That's the important one. There's also a tendency in our business, and this is one that you may have seen in your own organisations, where if you looked at a set of standards, for instance, you said, well, okay, sales is not simple. Sales is really complex. There's a lot in it. We all know that. If you looked at a list of all the things that you expected your salespeople to do, it would probably be pretty expansive. Now, the challenge, of course, is that you're going to have some sales managers or some business leaders, rather, that would look at that and say, I don't want to scare the guys with a big, long list. Can we break it down to 2 or 3 things? Now, if you can sum up selling in 2 or 3 things, I'll give you $1,000. If you could sum it up in 2 or 3 things and again, for them to be effective at that, starting from a zero base, I reckon that'd be impossible. But that was the sort of language that was going around. So they're the sort of arguments or constructive dialogue, I think we'll call it, that we were having inside the organisation at that point in time. No enforcement of standards. Johnny's been with us 42 years. I can't hold him to account for that. He's always done it this way. Mm-hmm. That's great. Johnny needs to change. And if Johnny can't change, get rid of Johnny. Because quite frankly, Johnny would go out to the customer, and I have seen this. You go out with a customer and you sit and you observe the conversation, and you're just going to have an observation call. You're not going to open your mouth, and by hook or by crook, it's really hard. But I'm sitting there as this particular individual who is exceptional at creating value for the customer, technically could create value for the company if it weren't for the fact that he's just giving it all away. He goes, that costs us about X amount to do. I don't even know why we're having that conversation with the customer. Horrific. But no, Johnny's a good bloke. Okay, so we can't do anything about Johnny. So there are some limitations there as well. Perceived optionality, of course, when people look at things and go, we've seen it all before. Again, I've been around for 20 years. We've been through 3 iterations of this type of work before. This one will be no different. I'll outlast it. And let me tell you, we've got salespeople that will actually say to you, I will outlast the sales manager. Poor measurement and visibility. There's a lot of shadows to hide in large organisations, particularly large sort of bureaucratic organisations. A lot of shadows. And so it's one of those things that is very easy for people to actually look like they're doing something, but actually doing not very much. And defaulted to old habits, of course. CRM was seen as low-value activity. Lots of duplication. This is the challenge with not actually integrating tightly with other systems. Mm-hmm. So that's great. They go and put an opportunity in CRM, but then our quoting system requires you to enter all of that same information again. When we have the conversation around how do we plug those in together so we only have to do it once, and they go, yeah, that can't be done. Why not? Because it can't be done. We have IT people whose sole existence is to say no and give up little ground from there. They are great negotiators, by the way. You should go and talk to them. And I don't mean this in a bad way. This is a fabulous organisation. It's just mired in years of bureaucratic process and, as I said, that inertia that kind of keeps things the same. These are all the things that you've got to try and fight against. And so it's kind of interesting to see which things actually worked versus which ones didn't as you go through this process. Managers weren't coaching. You couldn't get managers to coach for love nor money. And what you ended up coming back to was that they technically knew how to coach because we'd done a whole lot of work around teaching them how to coach. The difficulty, of course, was they didn't know what to coach or when to coach it. And part of that was the fact that they were busy themselves. And again, all of the research obviously shows, you look at the CSO Insights report for this year, what's the number one issue? It's still a burning issue. This has been a burning issue in our organisation for years. CSO Insights obviously highlights it this year. It hasn't changed. Simple fact is trying to get salespeople out of actually doing the selling for their salespeople or out of the administrative process or the forecasting process or a whole range of other things to be able to get out into the field and actually go look, see, check, and actually provide some feedback to their team around where it is they need to go, what they need to work on. Part of it was the fact that we had to acknowledge that we weren't making that obvious where they needed to do that work either. That was one of the core failures of our systems. So line managers simply weren't driving the real change. They weren't creating this sort of constructive tension that is required to actually get people to try different things, change and see the benefits and pick it up for themselves. And then, of course, we went into voluntary administration back in 2016. That was an interesting process, lasted quite a little while. There were a phenomenal amount of work done around data gathering just on behalf of the administrators and so on. So we came out of that, and one of the challenges, of course, was that we really looked at it and said, we've taken a backward step. We're now waiting on some restructuring that's still waiting. We're about 12 months overdue, by the way. So the challenge, of course, is that what do we do in the meantime? We've got to do something. We can't deploy wide-scale programs. We can't get people on board when they're worried about whether their jobs are going to be there and so on. So we've got a fair bit of work to do once we do understand that in terms of the change management. But in the meantime, we've got to achieve something. We can't just leave the organisation. We've still got an organisation to fix, and whilst it's better than what it was, there are still some challenges. The key thing for us, though, has been the adoption of agreed process, but it's driving that process. And really for us, we sort of talk about two simple words, rhythm and rigour. And it's putting a rhythm behind everything the salespeople do and applying some rigour to it so that we actually say, to what standard is it being done? Is it actually being done to the standard to which we've agreed? We've managed to get some buy-in from quite a number of the teams across the business. And again, this is an organisation that has probably 250 salespeople, quota-carrying salespeople, anything from sort of $2 to $3 million a year through to largest ones probably in the order of $100 million a year. Okay, so it's a very, very, very disparate group in that regard. But in terms of the what we've been able to do, we've actually been able to engage some of our sales managers for this challenge. And they have responded really positively because there's obviously now starting to change the culture of the organisation. That's really, again, one of the insights that I mentioned later is the fact that that's the sweet spot for us is the senior line leaders as opposed to the general managers within the organisation. The lower level line leaders will do what they have to do, just enough. The ones above them, so your national sales managers and so on, these are the guys that have actually proven to be quite fruitful for us. So we talk about three things: right action, right timing, and right execution. The difficulty, of course, is that we rely on, from an execution point of view, we rely on our sales managers to be able to do that and actually get out in the field. Again, that's that go, look, see, check, and spend some time in the field with the guys. And then you go, how am I going to encourage that behaviour? How am I going to drive it? I'm going to create some competitive rivalry, some tension around that. Without going to a formalised gamification system, how do I actually make it look as though there is some tension there or some rivalry there between themselves and their counterparts? And for us, it's all been enabled through CRM. This poor little old CRM that we really haven't plugged into everything. We found some interesting ways to actually just make it sing a little bit for us. So the first thing we did is we actually said, how do we get them to come back to the well? It's perceived at the moment as being extra work and optional. How do we change it fundamentally so that it's not? Well, more of their work needs to be in it. They need to be able to get more value from it. And so for us, really, that was use of external data sources. Now, in the construction industry, we've got people like Cordell and BCI that actually allow you to access their system to see all the construction projects that are coming up. And so what we do is we now load all of those straight into our system. We farm them out to our guys using just a fairly simple set of rules in terms of value, location, type. And so they're required now, task-driven system. They're required to actually go through and look at each of those projects. They come in as a lead, and ultimately at this stage, they complete 8 more fields. And before you know it, they've actually got that in the opportunity pipeline. It's visible to them, it's visible to their manager, and we've got a whole bunch of other tasks that actually drop off from that actually now start to generate a little bit of accountability. It's been fabulous. It's been a massive change. New projects and updates are provided on a daily basis, and they get notifications when anything changes. So the simple fact is that there's now value coming from the system. It's no longer optional, that's their work. Fundamental change for us. We've made processes extremely visible, not only to themselves, but also to their manager and to their senior managers as well. So what we now do is you've got structured task-driven actions that actually drop out of the system. And this really fulfills the right action, the right timing. I mean, ultimately, we can't get this completely right. And we were having this conversation before, Benny, around the fact that the sales AI, so to speak, is limited at this point on the basis of the amount of data points that it's got to be able to actually drive an insight around what you need to do and when you need to do it. So obviously at this point we're using some fairly blunt force tools to do it, but any sort of variance or deviation from an existing system, existing process step provides a data point to the manager to then look at what are the things that we are doing or choosing to do or choosing not to do through this process. Okay, and so really that is then to drive sales manager to say, okay, I need to go and check that, or I'm going to validate that, or I'm going to inquire about it, or I'm going to go and watch what happens. If that's the point of time we continue to lose deals, or that's the step, we don't create a structured value proposition as an example, then the reality is that that's something that the manager needs to engage the salesperson around. And to their credit, they've been doing it. Why? Because it's really obvious, as I said, not only to them, but to their managers as well. So we're passing some accountability around to everybody through this process. Just to give you a quick update. So large variance across the organisation at this point in time in terms of adoption. We've got some portions of the organisation that have used this religiously now. And to be honest, they're the ones that are getting the benefits of it. They've actually realised if I systemize it and I drive it and I remove the shadows from my organisation, people can't hide. Not only can't they hide, but they start to get on board with it as we start to publish or some of our live dashboard reporting and so on, actually means that you can see very clearly who's doing what. And nobody wants to be last on any of those lists. Let's be really clear. That's, ultimately we've now got a business where it's more palatable to talk about moving people on if they're not performing. So now there is a bit of constructive tension. Now that sounds bad in a way, but I mean, to date, we've not actually had to give anybody any actual formal warnings, which is really positive. We have had our entire New South Wales project sales team for one of our organisations actually self-select out. So the guy with 43 years, he decided to put his hand up and say, I think I'd like to retire. We gave him a fantastic retirement bash and we're all happy. He's happy. Everyone's happy. But it achieved the result we wanted. So if I look at our major contracts team, in one particular part of this organisation, sales volume in a market that is otherwise flat and falling, we've managed to actually increase sales volumes by about 4.5% this year. It's actually a pretty good result for an organisation that has been struggling the last number of years. Bizarrely, if I say that average sell price has actually increased by about 2% over the market or the actual natural variances in price, it's not going to seem like much, but for us, that's actually a big win. Because what that means is that we've got an extra point of gross margin thereabouts that is actually flowing through to the bottom end. Now, for us, we work on margins that are maybe 6 to 7% usually. Not a lot of margin for error in that. To add an extra percent to that is actually considered a pretty big win. Pipeline coverage now using this new process has actually gone from 2 times to about 5 times. We can now see all these deals coming. We now more often than not choose not to bid on a whole range of things that we would otherwise do our hats on. We don't even bid on now. We've now got visibility of that we never had before. We've now got accurate win-loss reporting, which, again, we simply didn't have previously. But not only that, but we are tracking all of these projects through to find out who's actually won them, even competitors. So we know what our competitors have actually got. We know what their monthly capacities are, and we know what the profile of an average project looks like in terms of the revenue splits. And so we now actually take a position around where we think our competitors are at in the market. So using a little bit of insights there. Again, none of that would have been possible just probably 18 months ago. And lastly, the best one, the one I'm most happy about, is the fact that I've actually got sales managers doing some bloody coaching calls. On average, about 4 per month per rep. Some are far greater, and obviously some are far less, the nature of averages. But that is one of the wonderful outcomes that I think that will continue to actually pay dividends in the future. Quickly wrap up. Fails without clear and sustained focus. We're case in point. It's very obvious what happens if you don't sustain the focus and you get distracted by a whole bunch of other stuff. It needs the whole of organisation to get behind it to say we want to be a better customer-centric selling organisation. Got to be prepared to prune the dead wood. We weren't. We are now. It's happening. And we're seeing a change of behaviour, massive change of behaviour, as I said, the constructive tension is actually there in the air at the moment. We're rewarding people that perform, but we're also talking to people that aren't and trying to get them back on the right track. Methodology needs to be tightly integrated with the tools your salespeople use every day. We've heard that a couple of times today, and we have found that ultimately we wish we would have done this some time ago if we'd had the ability to do that. But obviously now we look at it and go, it's on its way to happening. And as I keep saying, measure relentlessly and remove the shadows. Can't allow anybody to hide in the organisation. Everybody rows the boat or they get chucked overboard. That's pretty simple. Lastly, senior line managers are your sweet spot. For us, they have been a profound breath of fresh air as we've seen some change in those roles. Engaging those guys around their own personal pride in performance has actually meant that they have taken on board a whole bunch of stuff that I've wanted to do with them. And we've seen some changes of behaviour that otherwise wouldn't have been possible with the old crew who were sort of simply worried about preserving their tenure. And that's it.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Aaron. Any questions? All hanging out for coffee? No, there's one.
In relation to your win-loss and that you're getting accurate results, we've tried to implement that a few times, and every time we go about it, it hasn't really worked. So I'm really curious as to how it's been successful.
In short, because we've got a data feed that actually, and again, the Cordell or BCI provide a really good data feed in terms of all of the projects that are available within our addressable market are generally there. We'll make some decisions around which ones we will or won't compete for, so which ones sit within what we think is our addressable market, depending on the segment of the business. But because we capture them all as a data feed, it means that they're all live, they're all captured, and we have some automation around reminders around closing out all of those and actually capturing the data. And so even if we close it out as unsure, it still has some reminders around coming back to actually correct that data, at 2 weeks and 4 weeks and beyond, so that we actually get a name for who's actually won that job. So not only do we get the percentage of the jobs that we win, but we actually get a really good we actually get what we think is a really good read on what our market share is relative to those guys as well. And it's just the benefit of having, as I said, a data feed that captures everything, and some automation that actually forces everybody to follow that up. Ultimately, if the salesperson doesn't do it, the reminder then starts going to the sales manager. After, I think it's 6 weeks, the task actually then gets assigned to the manager, which doesn't happen very often anymore. Does that answer your question?
Somewhat. So I guess what I'm wondering, do you have anything kind of, that's obviously the quantitative side of it, do you actually do any qualitative stuff around understanding why exactly did we use this, why exactly did we win,
Yeah. We track the reasons, and we apply a fair bit of rigor to those reasons. Again, this is a qualitative process, as you said. The difficulty, I guess, of course, is that when you start actually asking salespeople, why did we lose a job? price is usually the first thing they put in. They love to go to price, and we have to kind of interrogate that one a little bit to say, well, is that the reason? When we do things like stakeholder analysis, we start to understand what's our level of influence within the customer organisation, what relationships do we have, and we start to go through a scoring process for each opportunity. And so relationships are a big part of that within construction. So it allows us to look at it and say, is it likely because of price, or is it more likely because we actually didn't have many insights into the organisation? We don't understand their buying process. We don't have any established contacts. And so we can actually start to tease out a little bit from that scoring matrix that we use. And that starts to give us a better qualitative understanding of why we may have lost that deal. That's essentially where the sales managers need to go in their assessment of it to say, is there anything in this for me to coach to? Or is there not? Should we have actually approached that, or should we have even attempted that bid, or should we have actually just selected out?
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Aaron. Well done.